Often individuals navigate life's path convinced that the true source of their suffering and failures lies within their own inner demons, anxious thoughts, overwhelming fears, crushing doubts, or turbulent emotions. However, what if the genuine threat is not hidden deep within consciousness, but externally? What if it lurks in the very environment, the space where an individual resides daily? Day after day, a person might endlessly scroll through a news feed on their mobile device, remaining in the same familiar room. They might regularly enter the same building, engage in conversations with the same people, and imperceptibly, unconsciously, their life force begins to wane. Their inner fire gradually dims, and they start to forget who they truly are. This happens not because they are weak or lack strength, but because some places possess such destructive power. The renowned thinker Carl Jung was firmly convinced that the human psyche is shaped not only by internal processes and inherited archetypes, but also to a significant extent by the surrounding environment. There are certain environments, both tangible and visible, and subtle, invisible ones, that can subtly but steadily erode the mind and peace of mind. Initially, these harmful changes may go unnoticed, but over time, an individual's thoughts become distorted, their self-confidence irrevocably fades, and their soul dims, losing its original luster and vibrancy. What follows will unveil the 7 most perilous places that, according to Carl Jung himself, should be avoided at all costs. The purpose of this revelation is not to advocate for fleeing life or its challenges, but to arm you with knowledge to protect your mental strength and inner integrity amidst its turbulent currents. For some places don't just cause pain and discomfort, they can alter a person beyond recognition. However, a pressing question arises: how in essence does one begin to identify such places before their impact fully manifests and causes tangible harm? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and eminent psychoanalyst, dedicated his prolific life to a profound exploration of the invisible forces that subtly shape human consciousness. His inquisitive mind did not seek immediate solutions or superficial explanations. On the contrary, he delved into the most hidden corners of the human soul, examining the depths of the unconscious, the concept of the shadow, and the universal archetypes that, unbeknownst to us, guide and determine our behavior. One of his most insightful and perhaps unsettling discoveries was the understanding that people are extraordinarily susceptible to the influence of the environment in which they exist, an influence that often surpasses all our perceptions and expectations. We invite the reader to reflect on their own daily experience. Recall, have you ever entered a space and instantly felt an unbearable heaviness, as if the very air around you thickened and pressed down on your chest? Or perhaps you concluded a conversation feeling humiliated, suppressed, stripped of your former self-confidence, yet unaware of the true reasons for such a state. The issue is not always solely rooted in interpersonal interactions. Sometimes the cause lies in the invisible energy carried by a particular place, in its palpable psychological weight. Jung held that certain spaces are capable of accumulating patterns, unconscious fields, saturated with emotions, deep traumas, and unresolved energy. Upon entering the zone of these fields, an individual begins to undergo a slow but steady and imperceptible reformatting. As Jung himself once sagely remarked, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This fundamental assertion, without doubt, extends to the unconscious influence of the environments through which an individual passes day by day. The discussion extends beyond simply avoiding dangerous streets or dark alleys. The subject of inquiry is psychological landscapes, some of which have a real manifestation, others are symbolic, but all possess immense power. They profoundly influence a person's way of thinking, their emotional state, and their ability to maintain mental resilience in the face of life's chaos. Let's begin with the first of these phenomena, one that many may already find themselves in: the echo chamber. This is a space where every surrounding voice sounds like one's own reflection. Here, opinions, beliefs, fears, and even personal shortcomings are repeatedly echoed until they take on the appearance of undeniable truth. A person might delude themselves into believing they are thinking independently, but are they truly, or are they merely reproducing ideas they have consistently heard? The renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung warned of the dangers of collectivist thinking, which can suppress individual reflection. He was convinced that the true power of the mind stems from internal confrontation with oneself, not from the supposed comfort generated by uniformity. However, the echo chamber effectively blocks the possibility of such necessary confrontation. It creates an illusion of unshakable certainty, subtly but steadily hindering personal development. Let everyone reflect on their own social media feed. Do the accounts an individual follows, the conversations they have, truly challenge them intellectually, or do they merely confirm already established beliefs? In the confined space of an echo chamber, any difference is perceived as a threat. Curiosity wanes and the human mind becomes rigid. With this rigidity comes fragility, for everything unfamiliar becomes terrifying. Carl Jung saw such a phenomenon as a form of spiritual stagnation, a space where the human psyche ceases to develop because it is never allowed to expand. It is important to note that this does not necessarily refer to digital space. It could be a circle of friends, a classroom, or even a family gathering where only certain opinions are allowed to exist. Within such an environment, a person begins to feel safe. However, safety is not always synonymous with health. It is worth asking, when was the last time a person truly listened to something that made them uncomfortable and deeply considered it? True mental strength lies not in constant rightness, but in the willingness to admit one's wrongness and grow from it. The echo chamber stifles this growth. It locks an individual in a loop of their own voice. And if one remains in this space for too long, they will inevitably begin to forget how to think differently. Once the capacity for new thinking is lost, the individual becomes vulnerable to the next phenomenon, which outwardly appears as ambition, but in essence feels like despair, the arena of comparison. There exists a space where an individual's true worth is determined solely by the degree to which they conform to those around them. In this unseen sphere, every fleeting glance transforms into an unspoken competition, and any success of another is automatically perceived as one's own failure. And no matter how significant personal achievements may be, they always seem insufficient, for the bar is constantly raised by external benchmarks. The renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung once insightfully remarked that the greatest burden a child has to bear is the unlived life of its parents. However, can this thought be extended to those unlived lives with which modern individuals inadvertently compare themselves? This refers to the idealized images they scroll past daily, which often have no real basis. In this metaphorical arena of comparison, a person doesn't just observe others, they seem to absorb them, their behaviors, their life schedules, their most vibrant and filtered moments. Gradually, they begin to adjust their own existence, striving to conform to external standards. And they do this not because such a path brings them true joy, but because it seems to be the only way to survive in conditions of constant juxtaposition. Has anyone ever considered how often they felt a sense of emptiness after achieving something they were genuinely proud of, simply because someone else accomplished it on a grander scale, more loudly or more quickly? Such an environment steadily weakens the human mind, shifting its focus externally. Instead of developing and becoming a more whole self, the individual gradually feels less significant compared to others. They begin to compare their authentic depth to someone else's carefully edited surface, their real lived time to their selected best moments. Carl Gustav Jung, in his works, repeatedly emphasized the critical importance of individuation, the process of becoming a whole and unique personality. However, in the modern social arena, this aspiration for uniqueness is often nullified under the powerful pressure of conformity, the urgent need to keep up with others and to triumph in a competition whose rules were not initially set by the individual themselves. And what is most pernicious, the more actively one compares oneself to others, the more strongly the individual distances themselves from their true desires. As a result, one loses sight of their own values, the inner core that served as a compass fades, and authentic joy disappears. Thus a person should ask themselves, Is the path they are following truly their own, or was it borrowed from someone else in this arena? Psychological resilience and inner strength are not found in triumphing over others in endless comparisons. They are attained by completely ceasing participation in this contest, by stepping out of the ring. Only by leaving the battlefield of comparisons does an individual begin to see things clearly and gain true perspective. However, this clarity often proves fleeting, especially when one enters the next space, one that does not invite competition but demands constant demonstration. This is the circle of masks. This dimension is characterized by every individual donning a carefully polished, acceptable, and attractive version of themselves. It is a place where outward polish is prioritized over inner essence, where authenticity is perceived as a dangerous step, and sincerity and vulnerability as something alien and incomprehensible. The eminent thinker Carl Jung, in his works, repeatedly referred to the concept of the persona, that very social mask that every person wears to conform to societal expectations and norms. He never claimed that this phenomenon was inherently malevolent. On the contrary, the persona serves as an important tool for social interaction. However, Jung strongly cautioned, if an individual forgets that they are merely wearing this mask, there is a significant risk of complete merging with it, leading to the loss of their own authentic self. One should consider the circumstances and social environments where they feel an urgent need to suppress certain aspects of their true essence. These can be situations where an individual is forced to laugh at jokes that do not genuinely amuse them, or to agree with opinions and ideas in which they inwardly do not believe at all. Sometimes this manifests as complete silence when the inner need to speak out, to express one's point of view, becomes unbearably strong. It is precisely such conditions that form what can be called the circle of masks. Such circles can manifest in various contexts, in professional life, among friends, or even in personal relationships, where affection and love, unfortunately, become dependent on the image a person is forced to project. Initially, such behavior might seem completely harmless and even rational. A person convinces themselves that this approach is the path of least resistance, facilitating interaction with the outside world. However, as time passes, this social mask begins to irreversibly ossify, becoming increasingly rigid and inseparable. The longer an individual continues to wear it, the more strongly and inexorably their authentic self recedes, giving way to the created image. As a result, a person gradually stops questioning their own identity, as the process of knowing their true nature becomes associated with deep inner discomfort and even fear. Carl Jung, in turn, asserted that true psychic power and internal resilience stem from the process of integration, the conscious acceptance and bringing to light of all aspects of one's personality. This includes not only virtues, but also the so-called shadow, the totality of suppressed desires, instincts and flaws, as well as all hidden truths and imperfections of the individual. However, in the conditions of the described circle of masks, a completely opposite tendency is observed. Everything that does not conform to the carefully constructed external image is inevitably driven even deeper into the darkness of the subconscious, becoming increasingly inaccessible for awareness and integration. Often a person feels unbearably tired after leaving society. This exhaustion does not stem from external pressure, but from the continuous need to perform a role. Prolonged residence in such a mask does not merely conceal an individual's true face, it inexorably isolates them both from others and from their own essence. And therein lies a silent but profound tragedy. The more strongly a person strives to dissolve into the crowd, the greater the risk of losing themselves. Sometimes this inner disappearance begins not in public, but within the privacy of one's own home. There is a phenomenon that can be called the quiet house. This is a space where love is merely implied, never spoken aloud, remaining unexpressed. Here deep feelings are buried under the weight of daily routine, and communication skims only the surface so that silence becomes the dominant, unspoken rule. From the outside, such a dwelling may appear to be a model of stability and even serene peace. However, within it, silent destruction occurs. It is a place where emotional needs remain unfulfilled, never expressed, and ultimately lose their intensity, becoming unfelt. The eminent thinker Carl Jung argued that the patterns of emotional response experienced by an individual in early childhood lay the fundamental foundation of their psyche. If these patterns are formed in conditions of silence and emotional deficit, the result is not inner strength, but deep suppression. At the same time, suppressed emotions do not vanish without a trace. They merely recede into the inner depths, patiently awaiting a moment of vulnerability to then erupt with unstoppable force. Often, an individual finds themselves in an environment where the sincere expression of feelings becomes impossible. In such an atmosphere, openness often results in rejection, complete indifference, or profound misunderstanding. The individual must master the art of concealing their emotions, feigning a serene smile even in moments of emotional pain, preferring to cope with difficulties alone rather than seeking true connection with others. This constant coping gradually forms the core of their personality. However, it is important to realize merely overcoming is not equivalent to healing, and visible calm is not always true peace. In conditions of such apparent external calm, the personality perfects the art of pretense, creating an illusion of complete well-being. However, deep inside, beneath this carefully constructed mask, the individual's consciousness continuously conducts complex internal negotiations, attempting to reconcile true feelings with what is permissible to display to the world. This profound cognitive dissonance, this constant divergence between internal and external, inevitably drains a person. Maintaining psychic stability becomes an extraordinarily difficult task when an individual has never experienced a sense of genuine emotional safety. The renowned psychoanalyst Jung asserted that the path to healing begins with open expression, with turning inward rather than fleeing from it. However, in such an environment where the suppression of emotions is the norm, any display of feelings is perceived as weakness. Vulnerability is declared the strictest taboo, and gradually, the external enforced silence transforms into an internal silent void. In this regard, an important question arises: when was the last time a person felt truly heard, without resorting to raising their voice or other forms of emotional pressure? Now, let us consider a completely opposite picture. One can imagine a situation where an individual finds themselves in an environment of such deafening noise, whether from outside or from within their own consciousness, that they are completely unable to hear even their own thoughts. This is the next state, and it is encountered in the modern world significantly more often than is commonly believed. It is called the chaotic space. This is a world of continuous impact, an environment of constant stimulation, one where a cacophony of sounds replaces true meaning and distractions multiply to such an extent that the sense of true silence is lost. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, once expressed a profound thought: who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. But how does one manage to turn inward when torn apart by numerous external forces? This space is not always limited to the physical dimension alone. It is quite capable of manifesting at the level of thought, as well as in the realm of feelings. It is an existence overloaded with endless to-do lists, numerous obligations, and pervasive background noise, to the extent that a person's inner voice is completely drowned out. They are in constant motion, instantly reacting to every challenge, always demonstrating their busyness. And all this because slowing down is perceived as threatening. Why? Because it is precisely in silence that there is a chance to hear the voice of authentic truth. Has a person ever wondered why they so zealously fill their day with activities? And not because these activities were exceptionally important, but because they cannot bear to be alone with their thoughts. In the conditions of this universal chaos, silence takes on a frightening character. Rest begins to be perceived as a sign of laziness, and deep reflection as a useless waste of precious time. However, the human mind is not designed for an endless marathon or a continuous sprint. It needs a certain rhythm, periods for assimilating information, comprehending it, and then readjusting. When this natural rhythm is disturbed, clarity of thought disappears along with it, and such chaos does not merely exhaust a person's strength, It literally fragments them, breaking them into pieces. The individual becomes distracted, their attention loses focus, they become easily irritated, they begin to mistakenly take simple movement for true progress and ordinary noise for something significant and relevant. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, asserted that the true meaning of existence is rooted in the depth of human experience, not in the superficial speed of modern life. However, the surrounding chaotic space, saturated with an endless flow of information and demands, relentlessly convinces the individual otherwise. It tempts them with the illusion of immediacy and urgency, after which it often leaves the person in a state of exhaustion and inner emptiness. In this regard, a profound, at times unsettling question arises. If all external noises suddenly ceased and all distractions vanished, would a person be able to recognize the authentic voice of their own soul? Or would this voice prove alien and unfamiliar, like a distant relative whose face was once known but is now erased from memory? It is in this context of silence and self-analysis, and sometimes in its absence, that the next concept finds its place. A place not external but deeply rooted in a person's inner world, perhaps the most insidious of all, the abandoned self. This is not a physical room one can enter. Rather, it is a metaphorical space that forms and expands as an individual gradually ceases to heed their own deep needs, their instinctive impulses, and their authentic inner truth. The process of self-abandonment does not occur instantaneously, but develops gradually, step by step. One small compromise with one's principles here, one ignored or suppressed feeling there, and so it continues until what ultimately remains transforms into a way of life that no longer reflects the true essence of who the person is. Carl Jung, delving into the study of the human psyche, asserted that the unconscious contains those aspects of our personality that an individual consciously rejects, suppresses, or fears to accept. Notably, when a person turns away from these integral parts of themselves, they by no means disappear without a trace. On the contrary, they begin to manifest in various forms, often taking the guise of overwhelming anxiety, destructive self-sabotage, or even expressing themselves through various physical ailments and illnesses. Often an individual agrees to what their inner self resolutely rejects. Thus, people sometimes remain in places, jobs, or relationships that drain them, simply because such a choice seems easier than facing the unknown. This is precisely what such a situation demands: comfort instead of true courage, numbness instead of deep truth. It teaches a person to adapt so skillfully to the expectations of others that they gradually lose connection with their inner compass. And perhaps the most challenging part is that most people do not even realize their situation. They tend to call it responsibility and sometimes growing up. However, this is not true. Growth, if it results in the loss of one's own soul. Carl Gustav Jung often discussed the process of individuation, a lifelong journey leading to becoming who the individual truly is. But such a path cannot begin if a person has silenced the inner voice that serves as their guiding star. Therefore, it is important to pause and ask, when was the last time a truly deep self-analysis was conducted, not an analysis of the external world, but of oneself? Does the individual remain true to themselves, or have they sacrificed a part of their identity in exchange for a sense of belonging? For the longer a person remains in a state of self-denial, the harder it becomes to find the way back to their true essence. However, even when an individual embarks on this inner return, there is a final refuge capable of holding them captive, that which resides behind closed mental doors that a person has never dared to open. This place is called the Forbidden Room. It represents not a simple space, it is an abode of past lives, filled with suppressed memories, unresolved emotional pain, deeply hidden emotions. Here are stored those elements of experience that were consciously or unconsciously locked away, for they proved excessively heavy, unbearably shameful, or overwhelmingly powerful for direct perception. The renowned thinker Carl Jung asserted that every person carries their shadow. These are the hidden, unconscious parts of our essence that we stubbornly refuse to confront face to face. However, what we ignore and do not wish to acknowledge does not passively remain in the darkness. On the contrary, it actively grows and gains strength. Gradually, this hidden influence begins to shape our behavior, our relationships with others, and even our very identity. Has it not happened that a person reacted excessively strongly to something insignificant and then wondered where such a turbulent reaction came from? Or perhaps found themselves repeatedly repeating behavioral patterns from which they seem to have sworn to free themselves forever. All this is the unseen work of the forbidden room. It is that very place that a person never consciously visits, but which relentlessly shapes every action and decision they make. And here is the profound truth that Carl Jung fully comprehended. Everything a person tries to hide or suppress will inevitably manifest itself in the future, returning to its source. The suffering an individual attempts to silence or ignore often transforms into pain inflicted upon others, and persistent avoidance cannot erase past events. It merely grants them greater, all-consuming power. Many people spend their entire lives carefully navigating around a certain room within their subconscious, consumed by the fear that if they open its door, they will be unable to cope with what they find inside. Yet the longer one evades confronting these hidden aspects, the stronger their dominion over them becomes. Unacknowledged facets of the personality, like shadows, will turn into invisible chains, shackling the spirit's freedom. Jung taught that true strength is born from the process of integration, bringing these hidden parts into the light, gradually, one truth at a time. The goal of this process is not destruction, but the attainment of wholeness and harmony. Therefore, everyone should ask themselves, which door, deep within their own consciousness, have they persistently refused to open? And more importantly, what part of their healing is still patiently waiting behind it? Now that these 7 symbolic places have been explored, some of which are external manifestations while others are deeply hidden within, perhaps many have realized their own path has led them through more than one. Some may have wandered in a kind of echo chamber, desperately trying to find their true voice amidst reflected sounds. Others might have silently resided in a solitary house, experiencing a deep longing for genuine understanding and acceptance. Or perhaps someone chose to lock themselves in a forbidden room of the soul, cherishing the hope that no one would notice the pain still invisibly pulsating in its most hidden corners. Carl Jung, as is well known, deeply understood the truth. The healing process is not rooted in the pursuit of perfection. Its origins lie in awareness. And this awareness, in turn, is born from the act of naming what previously remained hidden from view. There is no need for one to flee from the world to protect their mind. However, one must be far more deliberate in choosing where they place it, in defining the spaces they allow themselves to enter, in filtering the energy they permit into their life, and, most importantly, in being willing to confront those aspects of their own self they still fear. True mental strength does not mean constant readiness or invulnerability. On the contrary, it lies in having the courage to decisively leave behind what weakens you, even if that place, situation, or mindset has long become familiar and seems safe. This naturally leads to the question, in which of these detrimental places might one have spent too much time? And what will it take for them to find the resolve to depart from it? It is crucial to always remember that true strength does not grow in a comfort zone. It is forged, like steel, in the conscious choices one makes throughout their life.